I actually am from the town of Plattsburgh. It's where I was born, or at least outside of it. And recently they banned Bitcoin mining. And for those of you who don't know what Bitcoin is, I suggest spending some time on Google, but essentially it is a cryptocurrency that is decentralized and is basically verified through independent computer programming, which solves puzzles and algorithms to verify it. It requires a lot of computer processing. And that's essentially the basis for why Plattsburgh ended up banning Bitcoin mining, was the energy consumption required.
So what exactly happened in Plattsburgh? What was happening there that all this kind of came together?
Sure. So you have two companies in particular that were mining in the town, or in the city actually, and they were using approximately 15% of the city's power allotment. Now they get power from Quebec Hydro. They get about 104 megawatts a month, and the one company in particular was actually utilizing about 10% alone of the power allotment for the city, and that was a company called Colligan Law LLP. And what ended up happening is in, I believe, December and January, the city actually exceeded its power allotment from Quebec Hydro and triggered basically, doubling the prices for rates for energy. And that actually trickled down to some consumers. Some residents said their bills went up to, as much as $300. I think the Public Service Commission said that the average was about $10 increase, but still not insignificant increases, for an area that, otherwise has a, somewhat struggling economy like most upstate, cities do. So the city was prompted to look at how they could take action, and it ultimately resulted in this. It was a bill that was passed, I think March 2nd, that put an 18-month moratorium in place.
Interesting. So how do these operations work? Would it really, take over abandoned buildings and
right? So the two in Plattsburgh, one occupies an old Ames department store that has been abandoned, I believe, for some time. I can remember going as a kid, and I don't believe anything has been there since. And the other is actually occupying a former Georgia Pacific space. And what they require is, because of the complex puzzles and formulas that are required to be solved through computers, you need massive, server farms to actually do this at a commercial level. And you do that to achieve economies of scale so that you can generate a profit, because as you solve those puzzles, you're rewarded in Bitcoin, and that's sort of the mining component of it, right? But doing that requires, running large server farms requires a significant amount of energy consumption, to keep them cool, to keep them running, to keep them processing, and that's essentially what these are. They're giant server farms.
Is there something about New York or the Northeast where this is happening? Is it a weather thing? Is it why are they choosing these areas?
So miners typically, when they're looking at operations, what really is the biggest consideration is energy costs. So you're looking at, where can I go where energy is going to be cheapest, where I'm going to be able to maximize the most profit. And as the price of Bitcoin increases, the incentives for doing more of this increase. And obviously the price has increased exponentially over the last 10 years, but it also fluctuates wildly. So it's one of those things where, as it's increased, there's been an incentive for miners to go out and build out larger operations, particularly in areas with cheap electricity, or looking at rural cooperatives, looking at power incentives that they can get from the state. And the problem there is a lot of those incentives are actually tied to job creation typically. NIPA and people, organizations like that, or ESD, are typically looking for, okay, we're going to give you, some sort of subsidized power. The return on that for New York State is you're going to create X amount of jobs. Well, the problem with Bitcoin mining is that or any cryptocurrency mining, is that it doesn't necessarily generate a lot of direct jobs like traditional manufacturing would. So the traditional economic incentives that municipalities are looking at aren't a clean fit there.
Gotcha. So when we talk about these operations, we talked about the drain on the energy,
yeah.
The people's bills going up and things
Sure.
like that. So it's understandable why a municipality might say, hey, we don't want this going on. In doing that and in having a moratorium on it, what are the adverse effects of that?
Well, certainly, you're not going to have new operations in the town. Now, is that creating, a direct number of jobs as a result of it? Maybe not, but it does have a positive impact. You are creating, infrastructure that can be used in, other advanced computer, situations. When you're looking at sort of innovation that's on the radar, you're looking at automation, you're looking at, deep learning, you're looking at advanced AI technologies. That's all going to require, significant computer processing power, that presumably is not going to be less energy. So this isn't a problem that's just going to be isolated to Bitcoin mining. It just happens to be, the problem that's in front of us right now. So I think the downside is, you're losing out on talent that may be there for other reasons. There's going to be some indirect economic impact that comes back into the economy. You're obviously looking at reuse of properties that were otherwise abandoned that now have some economic value. Some of that money is flowing back into the economy. And you're on some level stifling innovation, and a lot of the the entrepreneurs who might be willing to take chances on this are obviously going to go somewhere else. And I think for upstate New York, we have some assets in terms of lower cost, and we need to be a little more creative, about how we solve that. Now, to Plattsburgh's credit, it has at least left open the possibility of trying to figure out a regulatory system that works, and the Public Service Commission has recently said, municipalities and power authorities can charge more, for mining operations. So I think looking at creative solutions that, allow these operations to continue, but maybe, take some of that burden off of the municipalities is where we need to end up.
Interesting. Maybe you don't know the answer to this, but are people doing this in Buffalo? Is this something that's...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually 5 years ago was approached about, co-founding a mining operation. And at the time, my concern was that we had to create a large enough commercial enterprise where the economies of scale made up for some of the energy costs. And, I ultimately, that's sort of where I was hung up on of, you couldn't do this at a small scale and do it effectively. It needed to be a large commercial operation. And, ultimately that proved out to be correct. Now, as I see the Bitcoin prices skyrocket or tank, depending on what day it is, sometimes I regret the decision, sometimes I don't.
So where do you see the future heading with this stuff?
It's probably going to go to the, I would imagine go through the court system. You're seeing other municipalities start to battle the same issue. St. Lawrence County is looking at it. It's apparently creating similar issues there. Once it ends up in the courts, listen, New York State's a home rule state. Local municipalities are given a lot of deference when it comes to land use issues. In a lot of ways, this is analogous to the banning of hydraulic fracturing, which was done on a land use home rule basis as well. So I think, you'll likely see a challenge go through the court system. And then the question is, does New York State, try and do something? It's questionable how effective that would be. But I think, what we should do, what we should be looking at is trying to find a holistic solution that works for both the municipalities without putting a burden on it, and also allows, some of these innovative technologies and operations to continue operating in a state where, we shouldn't be turning down, companies and industries in the innovation space.